Phone's off. Tēnā tātou katoa. We seek wisdom, understanding, insights into the views and circumstances of others, strength to seek what we believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy, while working in the best interests of our community. So, welcome everybody. We've got a huge public gallery today. They kind of figured that our agenda was sufficiently important. Apologies, I've received none. Just checking with Sandra. Nope. Electronic attendance, Councillor Fletcher, there's a motion on our screen to approve the electronic attendance under Standing Order 3.3.3 for Councillor Chris Fletcher. I'll move it, seconded by Councillor Wayne Walker. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. Declaration of interest. Are there any members of the governing body with an interest they need to declare for today's agenda? No. Confirmation of minutes. We have the minutes of the 29th of October 2020. The motion on the screen is to accept those minutes. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Paul Young and Councillor Philippaina. Thank you, Alf. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Petitions, we have none. Public input. I've had one request to do with the Dockline tramway, but under Standing Order 7.7.3, it's not appropriate for us to be talking about that. The questions that Mr Grobban has should be addressed to Panuku. So I've declined that. We have no requests for local board input. Extraordinary items, I haven't had indicated to me any extraordinary items. So we'll move to item number 9, first item on our agenda, which is a substantive item, the review of drought restrictions. And if I can ask Ian Maxwell, Andrew Chin and Mark Bourne to come forward, please. Yeah. And Marlon, sorry, yeah. You didn't appear on my run sheet, you don't exist. Can I also acknowledge online Ben Knoll, Petra Pearce and Chris Brandolino from Niwa. I did joke, if you're online yesterday, that after politicians probably weather forecasters have as low a credibility with the public as any group. Don't take that personally. We live with it daily. As everybody's aware, we went into a water restriction process way back in May. Seems like a very, very long time ago. We have since then eased the restrictions on commercial users, and the proposal today is also to ease the restriction for handheld hoses on residential members of the residential community. I'll move the motion. I'll ask Councillor Linda Cooper to second it, please. And we'll get an introduction from Council and Watercare, and then I'll open it up for questions and comments. So we're starting in with you, I believe.
Yes, look thanks very much, Your Worship. So yes, just a reminder, back in May, you might recall, as part of the emergency decision considerations during COVID, water restrictions were introduced. On the 24th of September, the governing body resolved to amend those, as the Mayor has outlined, particularly with respect to commercial users. And as part of that decision making, it was resolved that we would come back in late November to look at how things were going in terms of utilisation of water, particularly as a result of the move to summer water restrictions for commercial, but also to look at whether we should move to summer water restrictions for residential. And that's the objective of today's discussion. So look, in summary, water consumption has been maintained well below targeted levels since those changes were introduced in October, and well below our targets. And there hasn't been any evidence of any runaway demand as a result of that move towards summer restrictions. So really today we're here recommending, I suppose, two essential activities. One is a move to allow residential water users to have handheld hoses with trigger mechanisms, similar to the decision that was made with respect to commercial users. So that's not lifting the restrictions, it's moving towards a level of restriction which is considered to be more applicable to summer, so it's certainly not lifting restrictions. And the second element of the recommendations today is around really covering that period when the governing body is not meeting, so that's during the sort of the Christmas New Year period. And what we're recommending at this point is that the governing body, which makes decisions such as that you are considering today, that responsibility be delegated to the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and the Water Care Liaison Councillor. So that's a change just with respect to the role of this governing body. So the recommendations would still go through Water Care and the board and come to that group of 3 elected representatives. So those are the primary sort of elements we're looking at today. And I'll just ask Andrew just to highlight a couple of issues with the report, and then we can get into questions and answers.
Thank you, everyone. So firstly, I'd just like a point of clarification. I did read in the media, they picked up on paragraph number 13 that we might need to move to more severe restrictions if the rainfall of La Nina doesn't occur like is forecast and if demand runs away. I think that's a bit of a poor choice of language on my part. I apologise. What I intended to say is that we'll move back to a level of restrictions that we're currently in. So I think that, so I was really trying to imply that if a change is required, if the forecasts don't pan out, we'll simply just step back to where we are today. And I think that the other key point is that there is a need for many residents out there who have got maintenance to do on their properties. Perhaps they've got gardens for their well-being and things like that. So using hoses outside with a trigger nozzle, there is a need that's going out there in the community, and what we're really after is for people to use that water carefully, and the messaging is around not being wasteful, not leaving sprinklers on overnight, that kind of thing. So based on the forecast from Water Care, there is capacity within the system to enable that use of water for well-being and the needs of people's property maintenance to do themselves, provided that they do it carefully and not wastefully.
Thank you very much. Marlon or Mark, do you want to add anything at this point?
Just confirm Watercare received the most recent forecast from NIWA on Tuesday of this week, and it's a confirmation of the information that's been provided in the paper. So continuation of near normal rainfall over the summer months.
Thank you very much. Conscious of the fact that Auckland Emergency Management put out a warning yesterday for severe weather. I looked on the television and there was Hamilton drowned in flooding, and we got a couple of centimetres yesterday, a couple of millimetres, centimetres would have been fine, millimetres yesterday. We did get a good rain a couple of weeks ago that took us up 5%. We are currently on 72.4, I think, perhaps go up a little bit by tomorrow, but it's looking in a better position, but still 18% below. I want to make one change to the motion with the agreement of the seconder to add to the group that will be responsible while the council is not meeting over the summer period, to add to myself, the Deputy Mayor, and Linda Cooper, Glenn Wilcox from IMSB. So if you're happy with that, Linda, I'll build that in as a chair recommendation. I will take comments and questions today. I think I've talked to a whole lot of you, and I've got a pretty clear idea that there is general support for this. What I want to do is just have a big call out for Aucklanders. Aucklanders since May have collectively, both residents and industries have collectively saved nearly 7 billion litres of water. Now just listen to the start of the next word, 7 billion litres. And that's a fantastic effort by Aucklanders. And what we're doing today is not saying, okay, everything's okay, go back to old and less good habits. We're saying continue to conserve, but because you've done so well in conserving, and because Council and Watercare have invested strongly in providing new supplies of water, we can relax the restrictions and allow people to use handheld hoses. And I know that that will be welcomed by people, not maybe welcomed by those of us that thought it was a great excuse not to clean our cars, but be welcomed by people, you know, wanting to clean their houses and the end of spring, their cars, and of course to water their gardens. The proviso on this is that if we're demand to get really high again, or were we to face an extraordinary prolonged period of drought over summer, then we will put back the restrictions that we're currently considering taking off. And I think that that's important, and I think that Aucklanders will understand that and will continue to comply with the voluntary conservation measures that have actually made the biggest difference in this. It's not the mandatory ones, it's the fact that people are saying, Leah, we'll take a shorter shower. Yes, we'll fill the washing machine up to full before we use it, or the dishwasher, and that's been really important. Just want to acknowledge Watercare. I think, Marlon, if you recall back to the meetings that we had in Mark in May, I said you've got to pull out every stop to increase the supply and improve the resilience of water supply in Auckland. I had the pleasure last Friday with Marlon of opening the new water treatment plant in Pukekohe. Yep, 5 million litres a day, and 2 weeks before that, the 50 million litre reservoir. Good progress. We're doing the 25 million litres, and I want to acknowledge Hamilton for their generosity in providing that allocation to us. And we're in the process. We'll have Hayes Creek, and Councillor Newman will be pleased about that because he's been talking for some time about how we needed to do that earlier. We'll have that available by January, and that will provide between 6 and 12 million litres. And we're on track, Marlon, I think it's fair to say, to have the extension at Tuakau to take another 50 million litres by the beginning of June. So a combination of conservation measures and extra supply has got us through the driest ever 2 years in Auckland's history. And for those of us that thought we were being a bit conservative and not lifting these restrictions a couple of months ago when we looked at it, in September and October, we had respectively 41% and 43% of the average rainfall. So we're kind of glad we did that, but we are hoping that La Nina will provide some rain. But even without that, with conservation and the extra supply, I am assured. In fact, I've said you've got to put your job on it, gentlemen, if you recall rightly, assured that we won't have to put severe water restrictions in place. But that should not be a reason not to continue to conserve, and it won't slow down our determination to improve that supply to deal with resilience in response to changed weather conditions that are probably related to climate change. So I'm very much in support of this recommendation today, and now invite other councillors wishing to raise questions or make comments. First up is Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I'm in support of these recommendations, and in doing so, I'd like to add my thanks not only, as you've mentioned, to Watercare and the people of Auckland for their savings, but actually to the ratepayers who, if you remember, in the emergency budget, pretty much added another % on their rates for the investment into Pukekohe, Papakura, Onehunga and the new Waikato take. So, look, as Chair of Finance and someone who has struggles sometimes to help Aucklanders understand billions and millions, not because we don't understand the difference, but to Aucklanders to quantify that, Marlon, I'm going to ask you, how would you describe the savings that Aucklanders have made? Is it 100,000 Olympic swimming pools worth of water? What, you know, because you're quite right, Your Worship, you know, nearly 7 billion, that is a big number. But actually, just to help people understand, can you give us a bit of a real comparable analogy as to what kind of volume that is?
Yes, all right. It's lots of glasses of water. But look, just to give a little bit of context, if we talk just an average swimming pool at a household that's fortunate enough to have one, it's in excess of 150,000 swimming pools. So it's a reasonable amount of water that's been saved by Aucklanders during this period.
Thank you. I think that's a good analogy just for people to understand. So when we're talking about this, that's that. Look, my next question may be a bit sensitive, and I do it with genuine caring and without malice. And I just want to say, it's just a question for me, is I absolutely support the subcommittee of people making the decision over the summer. I think that's great, and I'm very happy with that. But if I go back to our last decision on this, the advice from Water Care was to allow residential water restrictions, with the same as they have done now, and that was a political vote, and some people voted against that. I didn't, but some people did. So my question is, what confidence do I have that the decision, should it need to be made over the decision, won't be political? It'll be based on advice, and everyone will get a copy of that. And it's a genuine ask, Your Worship. I'm just, you know, please, it is just a genuine ask. You know, it was a political decision we made last time against our advice. How do we all have confidence in that?
Well, that's probably a question coming to me, and I think with the 4 people that you've put on to make that decision, firstly, I think it highly unlikely that we will be in a position of having to make that decision by the end of January, because we'll be meeting again the beginning of February. But I hope that every decision that we make as a collective body, but to any group that we delegate decision making to, that it's evidence-based. And look, it's never popular to put restrictions on water into place, but is there a person around this table that doesn't actually believe that those restrictions weren't necessary and they weren't advantageous? And I think they were. So we would be getting, advice from Council and from Water Care, and it would be a pretty extreme situation. But with the dam levels where they are, unless we just get an incredible hot, dry weather period with no rain at all, over effectively, we're talking about January, because that's between our last meeting in December and our first meeting in February. I think it's highly unlikely that we'll have to make that decision, but we need to have it there as a safeguard, and it will be evidence-based. Okay, thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Cool. So I've got a few questions. First of all, let me just state that I am in support of the recommendations up there. So in terms of making this happen, one of the requirements, of course, is that households are going to need access to trigger nozzles. So I'm making the assumption that there's an active campaign around that you're ensuring that the locations where Aucklanders would go to buy those things, places like, and I'm not promoting anywhere, Bunnings, Mitre 10 and various locations, warehouse, have actually got a range. And just further to that, I make the observation that when I visited Australian cities, they're far more active at a store level in promoting things for water conservation than what we are and what I've seen to date. So that's just one question that goes to implementation. You're on to that?
The answer is yes. We've been talking to the likes of Bunnings, Mega, and all the other suppliers of these pieces of equipment for the last 3 months. We've made them aware of the decision-making process. We know they've ordered in stock, and in fact, we've ordered, I think, close to around 10,000 ourselves to provide to some of the community-based organisations that we work with to ensure that not everyone's disadvantaged by this opportunity.
Okay, so that's highly commendable. The other question I've got just goes to the increasing relationship that we now have with Hamilton. So, for example, what we've got now, and I'm just picking it, it's under item 17. Under this agreement, Auckland needs to maintain restrictions at a level greater than Hamilton. So quite obviously, Auckland now is much more closely tied to Hamilton, and the conservation measures, the other measures that Hamilton might implement, increasingly come into play. And without wanting to put too fine a point on it, it may well be that Auckland's somewhat ahead of Hamilton. I don't know what sort of rivalry there is there, but are we working, and is Watercare actively working with Hamilton to ensure that there's best practice occurring there around water conservation as best we can?
I'll take that question. There's actually a typographical error in that section of the report. The earlier section correctly notes that we have to have restrictions as at least as stringent as Hamilton. So they could be the same or at a greater level. And so what's being proposed at present will be significantly greater than Hamilton. Hamilton currently doesn't have any restrictions in place. They have signalled early that they are likely to be introducing restrictions, and it'll follow the same pattern as prior years, so initially alternate sprinkler days. To the second question about working closely with Hamilton, I don't think we've ever worked closer with them than we are at present. Also, as part of the agreement, we have daily communication to ensure that we are not taking more water in advance of what their allocation permits. As we move into summer, that communication will be happening throughout the day, such that if they are requiring or if they can release additional water for our use, we will be able to utilise that additional water as well. The next part of the conversation around best practice in conservation, it's probably just a step too far just at the moment, but it's certainly something that we'd be very willing to work with them on.
Just as a matter of interest, does Hamilton have water meters?
No. No,
Okay.
So at a universal level, no. So not
Okay.
all customers. They may have some for large use customers or their non-domestic customers.
Sure. So at a residential level, there aren't water meters, as far as I know. That's correct, isn't it?
Generally, they generally not.
Okay. So the other issue that I've got just goes to the ongoing need that that Auckland Council and Watercare have to conserve water. And I note that the exterior cleaning industry, for example, have developed best practice and they're actively implementing it, looking to training and the like. Do we have best practice in place now across a range of other industries, and is there any information on Watercare's website on that?
Answer that. Yes, there is information on the website. So there is information around best practice guidelines on some of the industries that we've put up today. So you'll find it today. We're working through a couple of other industries that we're looking to get that information also online. So that's probably more just after Christmas than before, unfortunately. But we're making good progress in that space.
And just further to that, is Watercare looking to perhaps change its contracting to make it in line maybe with other cities that have best practice, where if a commercial user wants to contract to take water from Watercare, that they have to have best practice in place?
That's an interesting point. We haven't talked about that internally, but I'll certainly take that away and speak to the team about whether we should do that. Absolutely.
So, for example, one of the very high users of water is through cooling towers, for example.
Yes.
We don't have any requirement that prevents anybody having a lot of use through cooling towers, or for that matter, wasting a phenomenal amount of water. That can happen, and there's nothing we can do about it as it stands, is there?
No, we can. We work with them to change. And in fact, if we talk about a new customer coming to Auckland, there's a charge that we have as, well, you know, it's the infrastructure growth charge. And if they get that right as a business, they pay less for their growth. So they're highly incentivised to work with us to make sure they're not overpaying that infrastructure growth charge element. So,
Hey, thank you very much. And just to confirm, our big industry users, and one of the biggest is ourselves as council, I think we've managed to conserve, we've reduced our usage by 20 to 30%, is that correct?
Yes, it is, just on a third we've reduced.
A third, okay. And other big users, Marlon?
Yes, we've seen a big drop in our top 100, on average around 20%.
Yeah, thank you. Look, just before I go through the rest of the questions, maybe since the NIWA people have joined us, I could invite somebody from NIWA just to give us an indication of what the medium-term weather forecast is looking like over the summer period. So hate to have you there and not be able to make comment on that, but if you can just give us an outline of what La Nina might mean for us and what you're projecting for December and January.
Yes, good morning. Ben Knoll here. I'm joined by Petra Pierce and Chris Brandolino of NIWA. So the extended outlook, which takes us through the summer season, overall, there's about an 80% chance that Auckland will see either near normal or above normal rainfall, and about a 20% chance for below normal summer rainfall, and that's including December, January, and February. The last 17 La Nina events that we had, and we are officially in La Nina, 14 out of those 17 events had either near normal or above normal rainfall. So we are able to go back through the climatic record and examine those years. And by using both the model guidance, which again suggests about an 80% chance for either near normal or above normal rainfall, as well as the historical record when we observed La Nina in the past, those two things give a pretty similar percentage. It's about 80% chance that we'll either see normal or above normal rainfall, and about a 20% chance that we will see below normal summer rainfall. So 20% is not zero, but certainly that is a lower number than what we were observing this time last year. And our climate drivers, what is influencing basically our weather patterns, is much different from what we were observing this time last year. So that gives us confidence that the upcoming weather patterns that we will experience through summer will not be necessarily a repeat of what we saw last summer. I will add that in the short term, as we work our way into the first half of December, there is the potential for an extended period of dryness, maybe about 2 weeks, the first half of December, and then the latter half of December may increase in terms of our chances for rainfall. So just bearing that in mind, that the short-term forecast here could come with a stretch of dryness.
Thank you. That's an interesting term, a stretch of dryness. What about Christmas Day? No, I won't ask you about that. While we've got NIWA online, is there anybody that had a question specifically to NIWA? I think that some information is useful. Councillor Richard Hills.
Thank you very much. Obviously, forecasting is much like council, it's a lot of guesswork. But the
They're professionals, they don't guess, Richard.
what?
Say that.
No,
We'll just let Richard ask his question.
I didn't mean it in a rude way. I meant that there's been a lot of the climate change is making your forecast. Sorry, climate change is making your forecasting sometimes challenging. And even this week, and quite often this year, we've been crossing our fingers for a big rain, and it's hit the wrong spots at the wrong times, or just hasn't come at all. How confident? I mean, I guess your modelling has some confidence to it because of your previous forecasting, but I guess how much do you think climate change is making it hard to accurately predict things? Because I guess my decision today, I'm nervous because not just your forecasting, but lots of other agencies have been wrong this year on when the rain might come or how long we're going to have dry periods for. You know, do you feel climate change is making it much more difficult to have accurate forecasting at the moment, especially in rain?
Would you like to tackle that one, Petra?
I was thinking, do you want to talk about just the immediate forecasting, then I can talk about the climate change kind of signal on that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we have working to our advantage this year is a strong signal in the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So when we have either El Nino or La Nina, that is something that the climate models themselves can grasp onto, and that increases predictability. So just comparing to what we were experiencing this time last year, we had something called ENSO neutral in the Pacific. So ENSO accounts for about 25% of our climate variability, and when it's neutral, that actually is a detriment to the climate models themselves. So we were working against that challenge this time last year, whereas we're in a different position this year. We do have La Nina, not just La Nina, but a moderate to potentially strong La Nina, and that helps then with the predictability of the climate model guidance that we examine going out several months.
So I'll add what Ben said. What Ben said is quite well. Hi, I'm Chris. So when we're making long-range forecasting, I guess the guts of it is that you want to identify as best as you can a climate driver. And as we like to say at NIWA, a climate driver is basically who's sitting at the wheel of Mother Nature's car. And if you can identify that driver, you pretty much can identify it with some level of confidence which direction you're going to be driving into. And that's not only good for meteorologists or climate experts, but it's also good, as Ben said, for the actual models. They too can see this climate driver and know what the impacts are. Now, having said that, we know the average outcome of things like La Nina or El Nino, but none of those are average. None of them are always average. They always end up a little bit of a different flavor. So hopefully that provides some context on predictability. I think Petra can talk more about climate change.
Yeah, sure. So obviously we have an ongoing signal of climate change in terms of temperature in Auckland and wider New Zealand. So far we haven't really seen a trend in terms of rainfall in Auckland. We are, however, expecting, based on our model guidance of into the next few decades and beyond, that the likes of droughts may become more severe and more common into the future. But so far, we haven't really started to see the signal of climate change coming out through the observational record quite yet.
Cool, thank you very much. And I wasn't meaning any disrespect, I just meant it has been difficult this year to predict anything with a lot of things, so thank you.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions, Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the report. Oh, sorry. Okay. But I just wanted to pick up on what you said. You said may face more drought weather. Is that right? And do you know when?
In terms of climate change projections, is that what?
I'm pretty much just asking the same thing that Councillor Hills did. Can we rely on your forecasting to be sure that we're going to make the right decision today about relaxing our water restrictions even more if we're going to face another drought?
So the climate change projections that I just referred to just a minute ago are they're kind of projections of periods into the future in terms of decades from now. So in terms of the immediate next few months, both Ben and Chris have covered that kind of how we get to that guidance and how we make those decisions in terms of the forecasting. And the climate change projections are somewhat different in that they look much further out into the future and they give us an understanding of kind of the signal or the direction of change of things like rainfall and temperature and so on. And so they shouldn't be considered as a year-to-year forecast, but it's more like, you know, by 2050, what kind of flavours are we expecting for summers or winters on average into the future? So yeah, I think the best guidance for right now is what Ben and Chris have outlined. And then ongoing into the future, the climate change projections are more of that very long-term view.
And I'll just add, in terms of having confidence in what we put out there, whether it's a 1 month outlook or a 3 month outlook, I don't want to toot our horn, but I mean, just to be honest about it, this is basically best practice, international best practice. Like, we're doing things that are up there with the rest of the international community in terms of climate prediction in this case. So it's the best thing that's out there, if that means anything. And Ben, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, we're considering not just local guidance, but international guidance when we're making our forecasting as well. So a wide variety of models that are produced by international centers. So when they are all kind of paddling in the same direction, that gives us confidence toward the going forecast overall.
Thank you very much. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Okay, I know Councillor Walker wanted to finish by 12, and I think some of the questions that Councillor Bartley asked covered off what my question.
Thank you, Councillor. No other questions to Niwa, because we can then, if you're welcome to stay and listen to the discussion or depart if you've got important things to do. But thank you very much for that. We accept that what you're doing is best practice, and you accept that weather forecasting isn't a perfect science. So I think that's probably where we end up. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now we go back to the general questions and discussion. Councillor Christabi.
Thanks, Mayor. I can imagine the most Googled term over the next 48 hours in Auckland is going to be trigger nozzle and where to buy it or what it is. Look, just on that, can we just go to those words? I'm on the cautious side here. You know, this is not resolved yet. We're on the way to getting it resolved. So in terms of the motion, the change, D, Roman I, A, have we got that well defined? I'm just sort of, can we make it really clear what that is? That's a water blaster. You can use that with a trigger nozzle, and your hand has got to be on the lever, on the trigger nozzle. If you're using a hose, your hand has to be on the trigger nozzle and it's actively used. Because one of the first things I Googled was trigger nozzles, and one of the first I came across was one with a trigger lock for convenient and less tiring watering over a longer period of time. It's also frost-free, which is handy in the summer. But, you know, I'm just wondering, have we got that right? Is it not that the trigger nozzle is handheld as opposed to the hose? Now, I'm sorry if I sound pedantic, but I'm just trying to avoid my picture of somebody holding a hose in one hand, which is on a stake with a locked trigger nozzle filling up their 100,000 litre pool with a nice beer in the other hand in their recliner by the pool. So I'm just wanting to make sure that we convey with clarity to Aucklanders what is required.
Certainly the intent is that the trigger nozzle is handheld whilst it's being operated. And Andrew and I debated this fully. This is very, very similar wording to used elsewhere by other jurisdictions in New Zealand. And our understanding and certainly our intent of that clause was that the hose could only be used or could not be used unless it is handheld and with a trigger nozzle. So that was certainly the intent.
And what about a trigger nozzle that's locked?
So look, I mean, that would be fine. Our intent here is about controlled.
Yeah.
So if you are prepared to stand beside your pool, perhaps you can do that. But you're standing for a very long time. What we don't want to see is water wasting. The kind of behaviour that we absolutely don't want is leaving a garden sprinkler on overnight when you're overwatering, or leaving a hose in the pool and then it fills to beyond full and wastes down the drain. So the intent really is about the aspect of control and care. And so the trigger nozzle just means that you are actively turning it on and off in between things and you are controlling that use.
Okay, I'm satisfied with the confidence that you give us with the wording. And the second point, Chair, is I think there's, and I'm sorry I didn't get this to you earlier, but on the E, one of the things that I'm pretty clear on is we need to maintain the water demand management program. It's no 94 here or early 2000s where we thought, oh, it's a problem solved, back off, go back to business as normal. We cannot afford to do that. So, Mayor, I'm just wondering if there's a modification to E or something else that we place there that Watercare maintain an active water demand management program. Make it clear at this stage, this problem is not resolved. We have got a long way to go, and it should be our pattern now that we have an active, ongoing water demand management program. So I would propose that, Mayor. I think it's very important politically that we signal that.
Okay, first of all, I'll just raise the question because I assume the answer is that you will be, but what you're wanting, Councillor, is to make it explicit. It won't be under E, but maybe can you just have a look at it and work out what you'd like to put up and deliver something in writing to me, and then while we've got the discussion, we can further consider that. Just apropos the first of the questions that Councillor Darby asked, this includes being able to use a water blaster, correct? And when we say a trigger nozzle, trigger you kind of imagine using your finger, but actually most hoses have, you can screw it down or you can screw it up, you can direct jet or spray jet or close it down. They are classified as trigger nozzles, I imagine, are they?
Correct. The important component of the intent is that it requires the user to be present, as opposed to an unattended hose that can still maintain operation. So the intent of that clause is that if the person walked away, the hose would close off.
Yep. Oh, that's good. Thank you very much. Now we have Councillor Casey. Next question or comment.
I've got a good question, a bad question, good news, bad news. I'll give you the good news first. I think the Mayor is absolutely right about the people of Auckland. I think we should be congratulating them in this resolution. You could put it in as a B and invite their continued vigilance to save water. I think that's an extraordinary feat. And just on that, because you converted the 7 billion into 100,000 Olympic swimming pools, the bad news is I'd like you to convert the leakage from water care, which is you're trying to get to 11% over a number of years. What does 11% constitute in terms of litres or even Olympic swimming pools?
Just give me a moment, I'll do the calculation.
Something like 100 billion.
It's about 75,000 pools. The residential pools. Yeah. That's based on our average consumption, so it's annualised average consumption. It's about 70.
Three-quarters of the savings of the people of Auckland over that period is the same as your 11% leakage.
I'll redo the calculation again for you just to confirm.
But I invite the Mayor and the Seconder to add in some approval.
I've just got some wording that, since you raised that, Councillor, just to see if this meets your need. Congratulate Aucklanders for saving around 7 billion litres of water, mainly on a voluntary basis since water restrictions were brought in, and urge them to continue with their water conservation habits. That sound about right to everybody? It's the seconder, most importantly.
Yes, and I think we should just... I do have a question. In terms of that, as a supplementary question to that is, didn't you tell us that we were better to spend your money on renewing pipes than just patching, so that we would get less leaks, rather than chasing and patching?
That is correct. Okay, I'm reserving your call to Councillor Cooper. So Councillor Watson next.
Just a general question to the water care officers as it kind of goes loosely to the points 11 and 12, supply infrastructure and economic and social impacts, and you know, congratulations on getting us to this stage. I'd say that at the first point, and also with some of the innovations there that hopefully the public in the Hibiscus Coast might take up with that that low pressure demand. But I guess we'll see soon enough whether it hits the mark price wise with that. But it's doing something, and people are given the chance. My question, however, goes to the pricing changes to the water tank carriers, and this loosely ties in with savings and restrictions and supplies and whatnot that are coming, that I understand won't kick into March. but on the face of it, involve a pretty significant increase around about that March time to those water carriers. And I guess more importantly, in terms of that social and economic impacts to the people on water tanks, not just in the Hibiscus Coast, but right round Auckland, which roughly could be in the order of $25 to $30 per half tank, or a bit more than half tank. That would seem to be, quite a significant increase that might impact on the overall balance here. So I'm interested in the justification for that, the extent of it, and also would just ask for confirmation if that includes coverage for the water tankers that were in use in the last summer.
So I can start with the last one first. So no, the proposed change the change in the price of water for water tankers does not cover the costs of the tankers last summer. And to the other bit, there's an awful lot of new infrastructure going in to support the water carriers. So I'll let Marlon sort of talk to those new infrastructure ideas.
Yeah, and I suppose I'll just add an element. So there is a lot of new infrastructure going in. There's been health and safety concerns over the existing infrastructure. So we're effectively substituting that, not only substituting it with potable water from non-dam sources. So we're actually looking at bores for the new infrastructure that's going in place to help complement our existing infrastructure. But I think the key element of the price is that if we looked at what they were paying as providers, the service, they were paying the normal price of water that everyone pays in Auckland. And one key element missing from that was the infrastructure growth charge. So for those tank carriers, there was no element of growth associated with their charging. So that was a key part of the decision on reflection around what we were charging them to adjust the price. So that is a major component of why the price has moved, along with the infrastructure that we're putting in place over the coming summer.
So thank you for that, Marlon. Just in terms of that impact on the end user, that's the people on tanks, and often there's people on limited incomes there. Have we done any modelling as to what that might add to their water bill over say a year? Have we done any sort of calculations on that?
We've done some high-level assessments on the impacts on the water carriers themselves. So we envisage, you are right, there's about a $25 to $35 impact per tanker load per household on the drivers. What they then want to charge the customer. We've had initial discussions, and Andrew was with Watercare at a committee meeting last night to talk about some of that impact on the pricing. So he may have more information, but we envisage with 3 tanks per year, we're looking at around $75 in terms of its impact. That's our estimates.
Thank you very much. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Are we questions or comments now? I'm getting a bit confused. No, I don't have any more questions.
We're doing questions and comments. So.
And comments?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
I guess, I'm really pleased that we've been able to get to this stage, but I'm also pleased that we have taken some time over it. I think this is a critical, this is about security of supply, and basically it's the basic human need so that we can survive. And so let alone washing your car, it's about having enough water to live. And so I think that the way that it's been managed in terms of getting more supply on board, thank you Watercare, and colleagues being able to put that money into that emergency budget, I think that was critical. There was planning, it just needed to be brought forward pretty quickly, and so we responded to that. I am, of course we're cautious, and I just want to answer Councillor Desley Simpson's question, though she did say it's no malice. It is, I can't think of less political game-playing people on this committee than anybody I know that would use very good information from Watercare and good judgment as to whether we go back to restrictions. I'm certainly want to do what's right for Auckland rather than myself. So I think, and I know the other panel members are the same, so I think we don't need to worry about that. I think it's going to only be put back on if these numerous recommendations that we're putting up here, it's very clear that we're expecting people to keep being careful. And there's already a press release ready to go. And I think both the Mayor and I have commented that we commend Aucklanders for the savings, but we all need to embed these new everyday behaviours into our everyday life forever. Because water is precious, and Watercare have had a really good program around that. They've got their own website called Water is Precious, and I think we often forget that there's only one atmosphere that we have, and all our water is encased in that atmosphere. It can't come from Mars. It's already in existence, and we're not making any more of it. It just goes round and round, and I think that is brought home very clearly to people. And I also think that if people were really upset in general, in huge numbers, that they had to save water, they would all be here with their placards. We would have the cameras. We would have all of that if people were angry. But I think people have just stepped up. And I think people really understand that, our resources are precious, and that we've all got to manage it together. It's not something just council can do and just Watercare. It's been a huge collective effort, so I appreciate that. And the other thing I just want to note is that the Chair of Watercare texts me, and I'm sure she texts you every morning, Mr Mayor, with our demand levels, so what we're using and what the dam levels are. And even though we had, I'd say pretty significant rain yesterday, we only went up 0.25% in the dams. So it takes a long time to fill those dams up. Not so much the Waitakere dams, but that's only 20% of our supply for the whole region. So even though some of my Westie constituents say, why can't we just have that water, we've been augmenting that with Waikato water for a long time. The other thing too is we're still only at 72.47 this morning, and we're normally in the 90s, 90% range. So it just shows you, we're not out of the woods yet. But I feel confident that with all the demand management in place, the extra supply, and the way Aucklanders have been responding to this, that we can get through summer and still wash our cars if we need to, if we really want to. But also those vegetable gardens, it's not just about the flowers, which are lovely, but a lot of people really rely on that food supply for their families and really enjoy it. So I commend these recommendations to you and thank Watercare.
Thank you, Councillor. I just recall yesterday when Councillor Sayers Skyped in and he said he could barely hear because it was raining so hard. The north stole the rain again and it didn't come down to the centre and the south. I did text the Chair of Watercare this morning saying it didn't rain as much as we hoped last night, and she replied, we've obviously upset the rain gods. So, yeah, look, notwithstanding the assurances we have from NIWA, there is no guarantees with the weather, so we need to keep that conservation up. And in every crisis, there's an opportunity, and the opportunity in this crisis was we've all resumed some good habits around conservation of water, and I think that will carry over. Right, Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Okay, I got a comment. So if it's only gone up by 0.25%, and it's 72.4%, not 90%, and we are not out of the woods yet, why would we consider relaxing the water restrictions anymore? I don't get it. If I want to wash my car, I'll park in the rain. So, I'm still unsure about supporting these recommendations. I'm even more concerned about the communication. Even in your report, you say communication is going to be even more complicated. What is your plan regarding communication outside of when people complain about the water blasting on the Watercare Facebook page? The response is, it was a decision made by the governing body of Auckland Council. So what is the comms around that going to be this time? Is it the same response? Because we look stupid. So I'm really wanting to hear from Watercare. What is the response? What is the comms so that we don't look stupid? Especially with this business of the trigger and the nozzle and being present in case the hose plays up. And puts out more water than it should. I can just see this being a mess. Thank you, with all due respect, blah, 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 blah.
So I'll start with the communications matter, and maybe Mark can answer the other question. From my perspective, the accountability sits with me, and I'm as part of this process, we've worked closely with Auckland Council to deliver the right outcome. And I'm sitting here comfortably now telling you that we've made a recommendation jointly that Watercare, with the supply that we've brought on, and Mark can explain that, and with the demand that we've seen to date, in terms of anyone having complaints about it, I will be talking to them personally about what we've done to arrest the issues that we've had over the last 6 months. So apart from any more assurances around that, I'll make sure that there are no messages around blame, because there is a tendency to go to that space if issues get tough. But I'm happy to take all accountability for those messaging. Mark on the spot.
I'll just pick up on how can we provide that assurance that easing these restrictions to what's proposed isn't going to cause a problem going forward. In the first instance, I'll just draw your attention to the figure 2 that's in the report. It provides a forecast as to what future lake storage levels might be. And in essence, what it's showing is extremely low likelihood that lake level storage would drop below the levels that would require the stage 1 restrictions. And why is that? A big driver of that is the savings that Aucklanders have already made, but perhaps the bigger driver is the sheer volume of additional water that's been brought on. So at present, there's another 30 million litres of water, additional water available today that wasn't available last summer. To put that into perspective, that's about 100,000 people's worth of water, people and industry. So it's a colossal volume of water. In the new year, there'll be an additional 10 million litres of water. That's about 30,000 people's and industries worth of water. And then by the middle of next year, and another 50 million, which is about 160,000 people and associated industries worth of water. So we're in a very different position than where we were last year. So increasingly, lake levels and the reference to historic lake levels becomes less important as these additional sources of water are brought on.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, it's that assurance, Councillor, that I received and cross-examined on that gave me confidence that we would not be going back to worse restrictions. At worst, if the weather is very, very dry and the consumption suddenly peaked, then we would have to consider reimposing, which we could do at short notice, either whether it's over the Christmas period or beyond that. So we have that safeguard as well. Councillor Hills, had you finished your questions or did you have some additional ones?
That was just for Niwa at the time,
Okay.
so I've got
You've
two
got the
questions.
call and
So
comments.
I guess, and I've looked through, and unless I've missed it, the exact point, or I guess, I've quite enjoyed giving people updates on the actual figures. So what is the trigger point? Is it like 2 weeks of over 510 and we're below 60%? Like how do I sort of know where we're heading, or we can warn people like, we don't have any rain coming? Like what is or it's not a perfect science?
I guess the best way I could describe the way our dam systems work is very much like a battery, and it takes quite some time to charge the battery. Equally, it takes a very long time for that battery to drain. And so hearing Ben say there's going to be a 2-week period of very dry weather coming up in December, all I could think of was, yay, I'm going to the beach. it doesn't give Watercare any concern as to that short duration periods of dryness. What we are really looking for is that long inter-seasonal period, so that the whole 3 months of summer, the whole 3 months of autumn. And then so in terms of what's the timing that increased level of restrictions might need to be implemented, I think the best guidance we have is utilising the drought management plan, which establishes those step changes based on lake storage levels. So where we currently sit, lake storage levels would have to drop by in excess of 25% before the next restrictions were imposed. So if you recall, last summer, with the very, very high demands we had, lake levels only got down to as low as 42%, and that was still in stage 1 restrictions. So the likelihood of dropping below stage 1, as I said earlier, I think is extremely low.
Yeah, so I guess, so there's almost no chance there'll be that subcommittee group unless we're sort of going 650 million litres a day and there's no rain. I mean, it's very, I just want to know there's a bit more buffer, because I feel like because of COVID and other constraints on you all, we kind of maybe left it a little bit too late, but that was not your fault. But yeah, so I feel as there, if we started getting up to 600 or something like last time, which hopefully not, would we be able to put a brake on it? Or are you looking to really hit that 40% again? Or?
So we've taken a very conservative view of the modelling going forward, and when we've analysed what that future demands are going to be, we've taken demands less than last year, but still significantly more than the demands that we are seeing today. And so if demand doesn't increase over where we are today, we'll see very, very little decline in lake storage levels at all. And so, for instance, for between now and the end of January, which is when I understand that the subcommittee would absolve itself, lake storage levels would have to drop below 50%. So the likelihood of a 25% reduction in storage levels over the next 8 weeks, I think, is extraordinarily remote, to the point that I think almost impossible. I think a more likely outcome of the need for the committee to meet would be the opposite. We have a significant storm event and lake levels rise to well in excess of the 90%, and there's a question mark is the current levels of restrictions still required?
Okay, thank you. And just my last question before my brief comment, probably to Ian. So we mentioned our community facilities and Auckland Council's water usage. How will we ensure, or can we be confident that we will be continued leaders on this? Like, we will continue to keep our levels of water use as low as possible, even without restrictions. So we're going to, maintain those levels as much as we can.
Yes, look, thanks for the question. So we have a team. Effectively, we get monthly reports through Watercare as to where we're progressing. We're able to identify right down to individual parks and users, and we are monitoring those continuously. We've deployed a whole range of techniques to reduce water consumption in the immediate future, but we're also working with Watercare and others around actually completely replacing the use of potable water by using non-potable water bores, harvesting rainwater. So they take a little more time to implement, but no, I'm confident we will be maintaining and achieving outcomes that are really best practice, particularly in that water usage area, washing, irrigation.
Thank you, Ian. And just my brief comment, I support the recommendation. So last time I didn't support any reduction at all. My reasons for that were I felt like we were too far away from our dam level expectation or hopes. I felt the forecasting was too far out for me to feel confident I was making a right decision, and that that I was worried about what the jump in use was. Those things didn't happen. We got more rain than we expected. NIWA are more confident, like it says they're more confident about the modelling, and I feel that having now everyone coming together is a better way of doing that. I also support having the subcommittee of those members who, if for some reason that, Christmas fund turns into 650 million litres a day, that we have a way to go, hold up, this is dangerous territory. We need to pull back, and I think being clear with Auckland is really important. So congratulations to Auckland for really keeping those water use levels down. And the other thing I'm really happy and more confident about is we're closer to having that full 40 million litres available per day, which to me, we told Aucklanders it was an emergency, we needed extra funding for that. And for me, taking restrictions off at the same time that all comes on board actually shows why we had to do that and what their purpose was. So thank you all for the work. I'm still afraid of what's to come next year if we continue with these patterns and these unknowns, but I'm much more confident now that we can get through summer with that new infrastructure and with the restrictions. So thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the delegated period is actually 17th of December to the 4th of February. That's in between the governing body meetings. I think, Mark, you might have suggested it was from now. Councillor Fesol-Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick comment and then perhaps a question more for you or for Deputy Mayor Cashmore. I still remain a little bit uncomfortable just around the comms. So, Marlon, I welcome again Watercare's position and your professional position to take full responsibility, but I am anxious around messaging, and that's all, and I'm sure that's something you'll go back on. Mayor, I wanted to ask my question to you because I welcome the people who are the delegates or who've got delegated authority, the IMSB member and the water care liaison. And I guess my question was, I've had a quick look at the CCO terms of reference for liaison councillors. I was just wondering if there at some stage some thought given to how we grow that document, because I think this is a really good step to have the liaison councillor involved in this process. So I really welcome that as part of the growth of that particular work.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I think, look, if that question arose and something came up and say involving the CCO that you're the liaison officer for, before I made a decision, I'd naturally try and get hold of you as a key player in that. So I don't think we need to build that into a resolution. That's just the way in which we'd do it. But thank you for that. Councillor Chris Fletcher, online.
Thank you, Your Worship. May I add my congratulations to Aucklanders and to the management of Watercare and also the staff of Auckland Council and Ian. But my question is actually to Marlon. I want to know what he views, the degree to which the user pay principle has been effective as a conservation tool.
That's a very good question. So if we talk about metering, I'll start with metering. If you look at how metering's been applied more recently, and I'll use Waikato District Council as one of the more recent examples of a contract we manage on their behalf, their demands have dropped over a third in terms of supplies to local residents in the region. So as a tool, the concept of exacerbator pays, user pays, whatever the term is you want to use, is very effective in controlling mechanisms such as demand. So it has a very strong influence.
So can you give me a direct comparison between, say, Auckland, where we use that tool, and to Wellington, which does not use that tool? What trends have Watercare staff observed?
I'm Mark's looking up some numbers. Oh, you want to answer? Yeah.
I can't answer, sorry, it's Mark Bourne here. I can't answer Wellington specifically, but if we look at average residential consumption through New Zealand in the Water New Zealand annual report, it shows that Auckland's consumption last year, so before restrictions were put in place, residential consumption based on known population at that stage was about 160 litres per person per day, compared with a national average of about 260 litres per person per day. So largely influenced by the big difference being Auckland's universal metering program, whereas most other communities around New Zealand are not paying by direct metering.
So, Your Worship, I draw attention to that because the last time we had a major water crisis was 1994, and I think you and I were both in Parliament at that time, and Mark Ford was the person who was guiding Auckland through that crisis. He received a huge amount of criticism, and having lived through myself in the role that you are now, the criticism of the introduction of the user pay principle with regards to water, that it was seen as just something repugnant to Aucklanders. I want to draw attention to the fact that properly used, how effective these can be in conjunction with the voluntary savings that we're making, because Aucklanders have made some extraordinary efforts, and I really welcome your recommendations today. I think that we want to encourage Aucklanders to show their love for our city by enhancing their gardens and doing those activities that do require some water. And I have every confidence that you and the team, including Linda and Glenn and Bill, will, make the right decisions. I am 100% behind it, but I do think that we need to reflect on that with the way that we actually move forward in other areas. And sometimes historically it takes, it's important to look back and see how it is that we've got to where we are. Watercare have taken quite a bit of criticism in the public, but I think that on some things they have been very progressive, and on the issue of Auckland versus Wellington, I think Auckland's got it right. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and that applies to a whole range of fronts. But yeah, water metering obviously has been very, very effective, and those that might have criticised it at the time should reflect on their criticism, because it has conserved. And if we were 160 litres a day, we were the second best conservers of water in the country. Since we put the restrictions in, I think you'd probably find we are the best conservers in the country, and that's an acknowledgement of Aucklanders, Watercare and Council in this. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I just think the community up in Auckland, like everybody has said, has done really, really well. But I just wondered, have you ever considered doing a survey of, say, a sample of 10 families with all having a similar amount of people living in the house, say a sample of, say, 6 people living in a home, and you had it across the region, to see how much water they're using? And it'd be quite interesting to see how it all pans out. And if we found that some were using a lot more than others, and they're all watering the gardens exactly the same and whatever, that maybe we can go in and assist and try and find out the reason why they're using too much water. And if that does actually happen, after the sample and everything like that, and then we notice that other properties where there's probably only 7 people living in a house, seem to be using hundreds of dollars more of water, that we can try and see if we can find a solution to fix that, because I think that's a really big part of a lot of, we've also got a lot of people that have rental properties, and in some instances it's the owners of the property that pay for the water, and so I think we need to try and see if we can sort that out. And I'd just also like to, while I've got you here, just congratulate you that I've noticed that as far as leakage on footpaths, we don't seem to have as many, and really appreciate that, and well done. But I'd like to hear what you think of my idea. Thank you.
I'll just touch on the leakage rate one first. We've got a significant competition between our 3 contractors at present in terms of leak resolution. So there's a absolute dedicated teams of people trying to resolve leaks extremely quickly at the moment. So I'm glad that that's being observed. Just with regard to conservation, in-home consumption, historically, there was a really good study undertaken a number of years ago by Brands, and it did exactly as you suggested. There is a longitudinal study underway at present, which means a study being undertaken with selected homes, and it's looking at how water is consumed within the property. There are several Watercare staff members that are actually involved in that, and there's two different levels of detail, one with looking at consumption in the home, and one looking at actually which appliances are using the water and where water is being consumed, and other just looking at gross consumption in that home environment. We use that information, and that guides our education programs and feeds a lot of the information that sits on the Water is Precious website. But what you're suggesting is perhaps just another level of detail, and it's certainly something we could consider going forward as well.
And I can add to that. So with Kaingaroa, over the last few years, we've been working with them on their list of houses, the counts that they have, and we've been doing that work to help change behaviours in some of the houses that they do have, because they've got a broader cross-section and they understand the numbers of people that are in each of the houses. So we've been doing it with them for a few years now. And the other point I'd make is, in terms of average use, if your average use does in one particular month go higher than, I think it's around 30%, don't quote me on that, but there is a proactive measure by Watercare to communicate with you to understand or make you aware of your bill being higher than normal.
Thank you. That's really good information. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Good morning. Thank you. A couple of comments from me. I mean, what you've indicated is that actually Aucklanders are very environmentally conscientious and good stewards when it comes to this precious resource compared to other New Zealanders. Not that I'm advocating this, but in the event that if Kaingaroa were to introduce meters for their properties, and if that was to be reflected in price and pass on through rent, would the likely change in behaviour result in the region collectively probably becoming the most conscientious steward of all, insofar as the water usage for the region would probably be the lowest in the country per resident?
As His Worship mentioned, in the most recent national survey, Auckland region was the second most frugal in water consumption, and it was a slightly unfair playing advantage because it was a year that that the entity that was better than us was one of the district councils in the Bay of Plenty, and they had significant water restrictions in place. So I would like to think that with the frugal demands that we saw over this summer and the tail end of summer this winter and going into this summer, I think we'll be top of the table. Your question was specifically around Kaingaroa residents. They're our largest customer segment group, so they do represent a significant level of consumption. All of the sales into those properties are metered, so we have very accurate records of what's being consumed. The only difference being the tenant's not funding that consumption directly. It's paid indirectly through their tenancy arrangements.
So, sorry, I can keep answering that question. The approach we've taken with Kaingaroa has been around education. So we've, as I said previously, we communicate with a number of the tenants through Kaingaroa to make sure that they're aware of the importance of decreasing their use around water. The challenge is we've had discussions with KO around passing that money to the tenants to then pass to us. It just introduces a different level of risk to us in terms of collectability of funds.
Yeah, I'm not proposing to change the way in which they, the pricing relates to consumption in the Kaingaroa space, but academically, would it be a reasonable assumption to say that actually the consumption levels in those households are probably higher on average than they would be for other households where prices obviously pass through?
It's a difficult question to answer. I could say generally that you are probably correct, but the challenge is we don't know the number of occupants in those houses, and they tend to be more than an average household.
They absolutely do. And my follow-up question, obviously the chair and the board of Watercare have copped some heat from me in relation to some of the CapEx projects, the timing of the CapEx projects. What I want to congratulate Watercare for the really good work that's taken place to increase supply through your CapEx program and the acceleration of the work. Can you just give some reflection as to the scale of work and the number of people that are working in relation to Hayes Creek?
I can comment on that. So right now there's 150 contractors on that site working diligently to get that supply online by just after Christmas period. The work that's being undertaken, around about 90% of all the water treatment process equipment has been delivered on site. That equipment was actually manufactured off site in a factory and is being assembled much like a Meccano set. So the on-site construction period is very, very short. So prior to Christmas, we will be producing drinking water quality water. That water won't be going into supply because we'll be testing that water to ensure it meets drinking water standards, such that after the Christmas period, in the early January period, that water will be accepted by the regulator and approved to go into supply. So there's an awful lot happening. Just by way of comparison, there's something like about 300 contractors gearing up to be working down at the Waikato water treatment plant site. There's currently in excess of 150 on site at the moment working across 3 phases of work. There's around about 120 designers working in the design office completing the design of that facility as well. So there's an awful lot of moving parts out there.
Thank you very much, and you're aware that both Andrew, Chin and I are neighbours of Hayes Creek, and we're keeping a close eye on you, but no pressure. Can I finally invite Wayne Walker to make the final comments in this debate, please?
So I'll just make some comments, Mr Mayor, very quickly. One of the things that's very clear, given that we've shifted away from reliance on the dams and using that as a measurement tool, that we need to shift to the benchmark that other cities have, which is around day supply. So I just make that suggestion. I would hope we'd pick that up. In that regard, we also need to benchmark ourselves much more effectively with other cities. The other concern that I've got, and I support that amendment on the part of Councillor Darby around active and going water demand management, is we always have to keep in mind that the amount of energy associated with water and electricity is phenomenal. Auckland Council is not only the largest user of water in Auckland, but almost certainly by far and away a phenomenal user of energy and associated carbon around that. So one of the most constructive ways that we can achieve our carbon emissions, and fundamentally it's highly likely we're not going to meet them, so we need to be doing everything, is by reducing water demand as much as possible, because that saves the embodied carbon. The other commentary that I'd make is if you want to look at, and this follows Sharon Stewart's comment, if you want to look at how to find households that save water, look at the data that Watercare already has for customers on tank water. Their water demand is hugely below the Auckland average. That's people like me and others on tank water. So people can save phenomenally more water than what they are currently, and Watercare knows that. And the other comment that I'd make around water demand, and it goes to Councillor Casey's comment, the leakage rate might be 11%, but fundamentally in parts of Auckland the leakage rate has to be at least 30% or more, because there are so many new areas that don't have any leaks. So we're talking about phenomenal rates of leakage in part of the region. Now, Watercare knows that. I think we should have that information because that would highlight the imperative of going after that. It may be even higher than that, but that would be my guesstimate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and briefly and in reply, last time we considered this issue, the majority on council erred on the side of caution, and I think rightly so, as shown by the figures that we got in September and October. But I think we are looking at a different situation this time. And the three things that have changed, and I'm really directing this to the question raised by Councillor Bartley, because it was a fair question. We now have guaranteed extra supply. A lot of it is on stream already, and that which isn't will shortly come on stream, in particular in regard to the Hayes Creek Dam. Secondly, we're closer to the summer period, and while weather forecasts are still not perfect, we have more confidence in a weather forecast that is 1 month, 2 months out than we did that was 4 or 5 months out. And thirdly, and I think this is the main response to the question raised by Councillor Bartley, Aucklanders have done so well that when we get advice that it is now safe to ease the restrictions, that is an acknowledgement of the efforts that Aucklanders have made to date. It's a reward for their efforts as well as an encouragement for them to continue those efforts, which I think most of the industries and the households will actually do. But we'll be monitoring that closely, and if things look like they were getting out of hand, it's very easy and very quick to reverse what we are deciding today. So please note the changes and the recommendations. We've had discussion around them. I think you're ready to vote now, so I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 To the contrary, no. I think I can declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much to Council and to Watercare, and thank you for your efforts to date. Much appreciated. Right, we now come to item number 10 on the agenda, and I'll invite Rose Leonard and Warwick McNaughton to come to the table. This is a review of the Code of Conduct. We've been here before, as most of you are aware. We are now engaging again with deciding the scope and the process for the review of the Code of Conduct. Having watched some recent programs on television on other councils, I think it's really important that we have a fit-for-purpose code of conduct. I try not to feel better at the expense of others that are less fortunate, councillor, but I do think in this term of council, we have not had serious issues arise, but that does not mean that we don't need a fit-for-purpose and best practice code of conduct. So I'm happy to move this. Can I have a seconder, please, for the code of conduct? And Councillor Mulholland seconded. And Rose or Warwick? Rose, I think you're looking in expectation if you'd like to introduce the item.
Kia ora, Mayor Phil and councillors. This report that we're bringing to you today outlines the scope for the review of your Code of Conduct and advises you on the process and the timeline using available resources. We're asking you simply to make a decision today about that scope and process, noting the feedback from local boards. So we're not getting into content of the code today. The number of Code of Conduct complaints of the last few years is not insignificant, and it has been increasing, I'm sorry to say. So we believe that this is an important review to undertake. However, I just want to note that not all of the complaints that in that rising number were legitimate complaints. Last year, for instance, we had 16 complaints. 10 were dismissed for not being substantiated. There was no breach evident, or they were withdrawn. For instance, the member was found not to be acting in their capacity as an elected member. 6 were legitimate complaints, 2 were sent to the Independent Conduct Review Panel, and 4 were resolved before using the ICRP. Local boards are supportive of the proposed scope and have made us aware of some topics that they explicitly want us to consider when we took it to them in the last month. And we're going to have the first draft with you in February. The questions you have already asked us in the lead up to this report have been posted on Nexus, and we're happy to continue to keep posting your questions and our answers using that format, because that keeps us a little bit closer together over this Christmas period and in the lead up to the first draft. you can put any additional questions you have to us, to Warwick or I via email. So in summary, that's my summary, Your Worship.
Thank you. That's a very short summary. Thank you. Look, as Rose has pointed out to us, this isn't about the substance of the code of conduct. It's simply about the scope and process. So that means I think we can limit the discussion and debate today. So if you can take account of that, please. I'll take comments and questions together, and we'll begin with Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Kia, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, team. It's fabulous to see this work being undertaken, and from my previous role, from my previous role, it is really critical that we have excellent policy. I just want to pose a question to you, Rose C, on the recommendations and the agree the process for finalising review includes A and 1. Just that date, do you want to change that date potentially? I think, or is that date, because you've just mentioned a different timeline, should we keep it to February or should we say we're going to roll? Because it says December, February, but do you want to just keep it at say February? Or
I think probably you're right. Yes, February would be probably better. When we first drafted this, we were a little bit unsure. We're not going to be able to bring it to you until February. So just for clarity, Your Worship, perhaps because it would set an expectation otherwise, so let's be fair to the team.
So I think the agreement is just to delete December 2020 and leave February 2021. So done? That's done already. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor.
Very quick off the mark. Councillor Linda Cooper.
I mean, I do. It's in the report, but I do remember doing this before. So, we did a huge amount of work on this, and we got nowhere, and that was no fault of our staff that were supporting us. It was political. We kind of just set it aside because couldn't get agreement. Have you? I suppose what I'm asking is there any confidence that we'll ever get anywhere with this? I mean, notwithstanding because I think the thing is I don't like to see staff time and resources wasted. Do you think we're approaching it in a way that might be more palatable this time?
I do, and that's why Warwick and I have set up the question and answer on Nexus. I think there's quite a lot of time between us coming to you with a fully fledged report and you having questions and only having one opportunity to ask questions. So we're hoping to sort of garner your concerns, and you actually could have quite a conversation with us, if you like, over a particular matter that you're concerned of. So I'm hoping that we'll get all of those ironed out before we bring it to you for finalisation.
Great process. Thank you, Rose.
So we approach this process in a spirit of optimism, Linda. Councillor Kathy Casey.
Councillors are bound by lots and lots of things, including legislation about how we should conduct ourselves. And my worry always has been that this doesn't, that it adds to it rather than replaces it. And one of the areas I'd like to see delved into quite deeply is harassment and bullying within this organisation, both in and of and by elected members and staff. The other thing that I highlighted in your report, and I'm not clear what the resolutions mean, are these policies that are identified, which I support, are they going to be part of the Code of Conduct or the addendums to the Code of Conduct? And is it the same timeline for all of these as the other thing? Because it's an awful lot of work.
Through the Chair, they are addendums to the code, and we have done a lot of work on them already. Some of them require some work. For instance, the confidential information access and disclosure policy needs quite a bit of work, but some are really just appending policies that already exist, and we intend to do very little work on, although we will review them just to check they're still exactly what we want. So what we are considering, though, that might help you is whether all complaints relate to all parts of the code, So complaints can be made about some parts of the code or all parts of the code, and that's something that people have asked us about before when we've talked about adding these other things. For instance, with the social media protocols or policy, whatever we end up with guidelines, maybe, are they going to be things that people can bring a complaint about under the code? And look, my gut feeling right now is that there will be parts of the code which we will explicitly say these parts of the code we can accept complaints about these, the other parts are merely policies that we have. So that has been a question that has been raised in the past, which we are now considering.
Perhaps just a comment from myself, Your Worship. Just coming back to the note about the volume of policies and so on. If the one workshop in February isn't sufficient for yourselves and you wish to discuss it further, then we're open, we're flexible about that.
Just my final, I'll just have a comment rather than a question. I think the sticking point in the past for me personally has been any more rules about confidentiality. I really object to people leaking, and I really object, because of people leaking, that my access as an elected member is restricted. And I'll always have that. Anybody who knows me knows that's true. So don't keep things from me, because I want to do my job. I don't want it on the day. I want it in good time. It's your problem if we have leaks, not mine. It's not me, and I want to have access. So that will still be an issue for me as we develop whatever this is going to be, because I don't know what it's going to be. I think there's rules aplenty at the moment. You leak, you're out, but we just can't catch you. The second one was the social media policy. I have a real concern about that too, and I'm wondering where and how you are getting the information that will even put a construct together.
Currently, Warwick's been doing some work on looking at what applies in jurisdictions other than Auckland, because many jurisdictions do have social media guidelines and policies. I just reviewed some, for instance, that he'd sent me from the UK, which seemed reasonable and I think would really help us resolve complaints about elected members in the social media space. It's an increasing space where you are active. And there's at the moment not a lot of guidance around it, but I do appreciate your concern. So if you do have any real specific issues that you want us to look into, please, Kathy, put those up on Nexus for us, and we will look at your very specific concerns. Or even if you just want to have a chat, happy to do so.
Just one key concern, and I think this will be shared by all elected members who have a Facebook page. There is a big difference between a Facebook page that you have for your friends and any public-facing Facebook pages that are open to everybody. So you need to separate those two out. They are very, very different. Where I'm happy for you to legislate over what happens in the public sphere, touch my Facebook page and I will come after you.
Oh, stop bullying. Oh, that sounds like a breach of conduct in itself, Councillor. and not to mention assault on Councillor Filipina, who's small enough to be able to tolerate that. I just make one comment to officers. Actually, breach of confidentiality is our problem, not your problem. We have Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Rose and Warwick. So the Local Government Act requires a code of conduct. To amend the code of conduct requires, I think, a 75% vote. Is that correct? Okay. So I think that gives you some flavour as to the challenge that you face to make any material amendments to an existing code of conduct. I'm assuming that that's why we in terms of review, we can have a consideration of policies in relation to all the matters which are set out in proposed recommendation B, Roman numeral 7. But I would assume that you'll need to try and address through the workshops the appetite for significant changes, because if there's no appetite to delve into these in great detail with a suggestion that we make significant changes, leading to wide support, then probably the exercise could potentially be moot, as it was in 2018. Would that be fair?
Absolutely, Councillor. And one other thing I might say that I think we fell over at the last hurdle because of a few small sticking points. We'll be a bit more careful this time to make these recommendations on the things that you adopt, several, so that you can adopt the bits you do feel comfortable with.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Your Worship, my view about this is that, and whilst this is a process exercise, my feedback to officers moving forward is that probably if we are able to consider the amendments part by part, because I think that it gives us the best chance to be able to make some workable changes, noting that 75% threshold. If there's a resolution for an all-in, recognising that threshold, that's where I think will be difficult. But if it's part by part, I think that is a way of process for making amendments following those workshops that we've got a better chance.
Yep, I think that's a good idea. I do note that the local boards have given general support to what you're doing here. We do need to update it, but we shouldn't allow disagreement on one or two specific items to prevent us having an updated code of conduct. So happy to, when the time comes, to put it part by part. Councillor Christabi.
Thank you, Mayor. Just checking, it's as I've mentioned to Warwick, and thank you, Rose. So the disclosure protocols that you'll be looking at going forward will address some of the things that I've raised before about lowering that threshold on disclosure of gifts, etc. And you'll cover that. Yet to be determined. That's part of the scope. That's good. And also the disclosure of approaches. I'm very aware, being on the AT board as liaison councillor, they've actually got quite a strict standard there. I commend them for it. If a staff member is approached in any way that might be deemed an inappropriate approach, they are bound to report that straight away. It's a bit like drug testing in cricket, isn't it? So, I'm assuming that sort of detail is going to be in the scope as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm just going to, did you say Auckland Transport staff?
Auckland Transport staff and consultants, I understand, are all bound to disclose any approach.
I'll have a look at what they've got on offer in their guidelines.
Great, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. So I'm assuming that in this review, and certainly as it goes to principles, that anything to do with the code of conduct is in keeping with the principles of natural justice? Yes. So that should pervade everything, shouldn't it? Yeah, okay. So my question, a follow-up question, and it goes to what may or may not be happening in the review, is that as it stands, I understand anonymous complaints can be made against people, councillors, local board, anyone else, and that's unless there's a very good reason for withholding the identity, and a very good one. So the threshold for that is not just I don't want my name to be known, that there has to be some notion of serious threat to that person, and that's basically reinforced by any legal views on employment law. So I'm just curious to know whether that is going to be visited anyway in terms of the code, the process, the principles.
Your Worship, as far as I'm aware, we haven't had an anonymous formal complaint under the Code of Conduct. It's an interesting question that Councillor Watson has raised, and certainly something we should look into.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between an anonymous complaint, which you should treat sceptically, but nevertheless, probably you'd have to, if it was serious, had to check it out, and one where the person wishes to remain confidential. You see the difference I'm making there, John?
Yes, but in practical effect, it amounts to the same thing. So what I'm saying, so a degree, so certainly the anonymous complaint is different, but what I'm saying is that where the complainant wishes to have their identity remain unknown to the person who's under investigation, there has to be a very high threshold for that to be agreed to. And I'm asking if that has been taken into account, because it's my impression that there have been cases that have occurred in the past where you have had people making complaints who have not had their identities revealed, and therefore the person being complained about hasn't been able to respond in full and as is in keeping with the principles of natural justice.
Natural justice usually requires the accuser to be able to face the accuser, and if you were to breach that principle, there would have to be a very good reason. Is that where we'd end up? I mean, it's a great question.
That is a good question. Under the current code, the emphasis on the initial process is to resolve the complaint. And it's difficult to imagine a scenario where you can resolve the complaint without knowing who the complainer was. It involves both parties. And if it's escalated, it goes to an independent panel who conducts a hearing between both parties. The code as it is at the moment anyway just doesn't provide for anonymous complaints, really.
So what I'm hearing there, Mr. Mayor, is that our process as it exists is in keeping with those principles of natural justice, and that high threshold would have to be met for that situation to eventuate.
I think that's a fair assumption.
Okay.
Okay, lastly, Councillor Pipakoon.
Thank you, Koramatua, Morena Koutou. Thank you for this, and I do have a few questions and a quick comment, if I may. I know LG&Z have been grappling with this issue as they deal with a few councils that are in meltdown at the moment, and putting a lot of work into assisting with codes of practice. So are you getting support from LG&Z or drawing on their expertise as well?
Through you, Your Worship, there was initial email correspondence between myself and the acting chief executive at the time. That was a few weeks ago, but we haven't caught up since.
Because one of the, two big areas that members brought to National Council when this was discussed was particularly around social media creating a lot of difficulties with a code of conduct, particularly where it's elected members attacking each other, or attacks that are on social media, which have led to some people deciding not to stand again because it was just getting so awful online. So that was one big area that they were grappling with, and the other one is just about the sanctions and how difficult that is. And at the moment, you might go through a process, but really there's nothing you can do if elected members dig in and don't accept the process. So those are big areas. Don't expect to have answers to those. Also just had a question around the standing orders and how they interrelate. And I find it interesting that often it's our collective lack of perhaps applying the standing orders can lead to escalating what could be perceived as sort of aggression or bullying, particularly towards staff. And I use the example of where we're in debate. We're meant to be debating each other, not trying to argue with staff. And very rarely, we don't actually pull back often from that. And I just wonder how we deal sometimes with that overlap between standing orders and code of conduct. It's fair to say that that is something that takes time to learn, and behaviour sort of becomes the norm. I think that training is probably the only way to address that that particular issue. And we have had other issues around the interrelationship between standing orders and the code, and that when we're in a meeting, the chair is running the meeting, and what is decided in the meeting is not something open to further public complaint, if you like. So that has been an issue that we have been looking at, and I believe Warwick will provide us some additional clarity on that. But that's probably all I could say about kind of the behaviour in the chamber and what becomes normal.
I guess what goes hand in hand with the code of conduct and standing orders is just the training we get around it, because we can do all that work. If we don't actually understand it and know what's in it, then it doesn't really help. Just if I may just make a quick comment. Thank you. In terms of like looking at this area, and it's really important in terms of how we deal with each other. I don't know if I'm going to jinx it, but I did just want to comment that when I see there's a lot of local governments getting a lot of bad rap at the moment about how councillors are behaving and what's happening in other councils, and Auckland's kind of getting dumped in that same category, but that's not my experience of this year, and I just wanted to acknowledge all my colleagues and that I feel that we're getting through this year in good heart. And generally, I'd like to just think that, you know, there's been, just in terms of yesterday when we had some really good discussion around different issues. And so I just want to acknowledge that I hope that we can continue, that a lot of it is just around the relationships we form and coming into debate, being with open minds and willingness to cooperate, and however much we have codes of conduct or layers of rules, that they don't really amount to much unless we all bring to the table that kind of attitude of working together. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for leading us through a difficult year, and colleagues, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Thank you, Councillor Coombe, and endorse those comments. And actually, the affirmation that we start the governing body meetings with is not a bad little code of conduct either, if you think about it. Right, I think we're ready to vote on this. So I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Declare it carried. Now, I probably jinxed it with my comment, as Councillor Simpson acknowledged at the start of the last item, but I reckon we could get through the rest of the agenda before lunch with a lot of cooperation and a little bit of restraint. So if I can have to the table, please, Warren McClellan and John Dogood. Are they? Okay. I think I'll go ahead anyway. I'm going to ask Councillor Coombe to move this. Do we have a seconder, please? Councillor Bartley, caught my eye. Thank you. I think even without our officers here, this was something that was debated before Chris Darby's committee, and it needs to be approved by this committee, but I don't think we need to relitigate it. So I will ask if there are comments and questions. Councillor Filipaina.
I don't want to relitigate, Your Worship. I do, however, have a question of clarification. Subject to the Waiheke Local Board establishing a committee of the whole, is that committee of the whole the same as the Waiheke Area Plan Working Party? Because it's those decisions. Am I looking at this recommendation and that the Waiheke Local Board firstly needs to establish a committee of the whole? It then has to then take on the recommendations from another working party, which is the Waiheke Area Plan Working Party. The reason I'm asking this particular question is that I would have thought the Waiheke Area Plan Working Party would have been the one and only with member Ngā Mane on there. So then they are the ones that are making that decision and recommendations back to the local board instead of setting up a committee of the whole. That's where I'm getting confused with that particular recommendation.
Okay, Phil Wilson, thank you, coming to the rescue.
Thank you, Councillor. I think important to note that the governing body can only delegate to the board. The board will make its own decision about its, and I think that recommendation has been worked through with the board. They are in a position, should they choose to second somebody on there, but the provisions, for example, as they relate to IMSB representation, in this environment are different in a board situation, and they need to make that call. So it's appropriate that it says the allocation is to the board as a whole.
So just supplementary, I've got no issues with it staying with the local board. What I'm asking is that first particular sentence of that recommendation is for the Waiheke local board to establish a committee of the whole. That's number one. Then that committee of the whole will then get the recommendations from the Waiheke Area Plan Working Party, who will then, I'm assuming according to this, go back to the committee of the whole, who will then have to go back to the local board to approve or not. And that's all I'm saying, because at the moment it reads to me there's going to be two committees set up, committee of the whole, as well as the Waiheke Area Plan Working Party. That's all I wanted to find out, because if that's the case, I think we're duplicating it. No problems with the Working Party, as in the decision going back to Waiheke local board. No problem. It's the mechanism that I'm trying to establish. Is it the committee of the whole that they have to set up, or the Working Party? It may be the Working Party, may be the committee of the whole. I'm just saying that at the moment this recommendation says there's two that have to be there's a committee of the whole has to be established, and it's the recommendations from the Working Party that then go back there. It just seems like another step in there. I'd rather have just one, which is the Working Party that goes back to the local board. That's all.
I understand that the office is on their way. I may be quite wrong. I assumed that you had to create a committee of the whole so that you could take the whole board plus somebody from the IMSB, and that's what the intention was.
Worship, that's why I got confused with the Working Party that they're looking at. Is the Working Party the committee of the whole that they have to establish?
Yeah.
It appears not. That's the point.
I can't answer that yet, but Meredith, would you like to address that?
Yeah, yes, I can. Hopefully I can help. I know it's slightly confusing. The arrangement was in order to ensure that an IMSB member could take the decision. And so what I understand the purpose is they will set up that committee of the whole and then sub-delegate the decision-making to that committee of the whole, so it won't need to go back to the local board again. The committee of the whole will take the decision on the recommendation of the Working Party.
We'll quit while we're ahead. I have no other questions on that, so I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 12. Sorry, was that a no? And you'd like that noted, Councillor? Thank you. Item number 12 is a summary of governing body information memoranda and briefing. Can I have a mover for that, please? I think I heard Councillor Walker and Councillor Mulholland seconding it. I have this bias to the left, Councillor, you know that. So I'll put that, it's all done, Warren, thank you. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come to item number 13, a summary of confidential decisions. Councillor Simpson is moving, and Councillor Professor Collins is seconding. If there are no questions. Oh, okay, thank you. We'll note that there is a conflict there. Don't go too far, because it'll be over fairly soon. So I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. The next item, item number 14, is a process-only report. The Deputy Mayor will move, and who do I have as a seconder? Councillor Sayers hasn't seconded anything yet, so we'll move into confidential shortly if there's, so probably there's no questions or comments at this point. I'll put the recommendation that we note there will be a confidential report. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And now I'd like somebody to move that we, extraordinary business, there's been none notified. And Councillor Walker beating the gun there. Procedural motion to exclude the public. This is on the basis that it contains information relating to the setting of performance objectives that are yet to be agreed between the governing body and the Chief Executive. It's been moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by Councillor Mulholland, that we move into public exclusion. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Right, we come now to the last item, which is confident.